Good afternoon. So I think in my session, as Rajiv originally said, I hope he will talk about some global experiences. And I think attempt today for me is really to bring in context to what all has already been said since morning. And I think that's more. Let me just first start with my brief introduction. I think I'm a chartered accountant with more than 25 years in this profession. And I think the exciting phase of having worked on this project with Mr. Salecha on building up for this, when you see some of those materials, some of these things, we've been very closely associated, is that we were able to bring in what we've learned globally. We've seen a number of similar projects, and I'll share some of those when I start talking later, into what is more relevant for India. And I think when we see extraordinary momentum being built over the last couple of years on this project, it excites us even more. The second piece that was very exciting was the level of sincerity with which Railways is working. I think lots been said on saying what's the value proposition of accounting reforms, but I think there is a genuine need to appreciate the Railways initiative because there are very few organizations of this size and magnitude who would make an attempt and then take a target to do it 2 years. We've heard 2 years, 1 year, 3 years. I can tell you past experience in countries who've had very mature transformational journey on accounting reforms, they've been much longer and they're much smaller than Indian Railways. So I think that's the other very important piece that I captured personally when I was involved in this whole project. So I think with that, let me just try to bring in something for people who are more tuned to looking at corporate balance sheets. You've heard that from Varsha, you've heard that from Bharat, we've heard that from different people. Take 30 seconds just to read, and again, you've heard all of this since morning. It is a conglomerate. Imagine a corporation which is doing manufacturing pretty much throughout the whole value chain of manufacturing. Imagine an organization which does pretty much all types of services that an organization could arguably get into. Imagine an organization which runs such a large infrastructure. Imagine also the largest market cap company today. Which is the largest market cap company? Well, I don't want to name the companies. If we look at the top 10 companies, 300 lakhs to 450 lakhs, 500 lakhs broadly is the market cap. Imagine the market cap this company could potentially have if they had proper set of financial statements. Okay, so I think that's the journey that this organization is going. You've heard the lender's perspective, you've heard the supplier's perspective. A couple of other stakeholders have been missed out. I'll cover those. The other important piece I want to talk about is when we talk about accounting reforms, we talk in very narrow terms when we're looking at Indian Railways as an organization. It is an agenda for government. And as I said earlier, Indian Railways is the first mover, would obviously have maximum amount of learning, which then the other government bodies and the other corporations can, capitalize on. When you compare this organization with a private sector organization, you do not see any critical success factor or KPI which is different, except for the core that this organization is run for the public, and thus equity is a more important consideration for them when they set their purpose, whilst the others arguably would look at wealth or the profitability. It is not theoretically it is not a not-for-profit organization, but classified as such simply because profit is not the motive with which an organization is working. When you start looking at various other parameters, and Mr. Salecha talked about the falling market share in freight. The fact that there is significant variation in the rate realization of freight and passenger when you compare it with the global best practices. Interestingly, when you look at India, for example, India freight, we have 30% market share. In that sense, we've lost a significant part to roadways, but the price realization in freight is comparatively higher when you compare it with US, where the price realization is much lower. whilst the passenger price realization in India is significantly lower compared to when you come, more mature markets like US. Now, I think why is that is also a function of, do I have some of the mechanics of putting my financial statements in that order so that people can understand not only external stakeholders. We've talked about external stakeholders. There are internal stakeholders who will have to also get a better information to be able to make right decisions. So when you start looking at the global data points, there is evidence, and I think that there was a mention of, the correlation between GDP growth and the growth of economy when you look at accounting reforms as a core. There are two markets who did this in early 90s, Australia and New Zealand. If you look at the period after the first 5 years of transformation, the GDP growth was much higher. I think it increased by more than 3% on those years, incremental to the normal increase prior to that. Simply because the financial information that was going on was accelerating the investments in railways, as in turn was improving the demand for their services. It becomes more competitive. There are at least 7 other countries today. So when you look at Switzerland, when you look at Brazil, China, Singapore, Russia, all of them have gone through this transformation. So India as a country Indian Railways particularly, had made a start fairly early, but we are somewhat behind when you compare it with much smaller markets where railways are already significantly ahead of us. Okay, so Cube, and I think another important factor is what is the reason, and we've all really looked at external stakeholders and internal stakeholders. I think the evidence in rest of the world is more on combination of both. So the drivers for governments has been to say, is there a need for us to have better budgetary control, in turn resulting in better KPIs, better performance appraisal mechanism, better costing. Purpose could be very different. Where the market is open, where you're saying there is external competitors, we need to then consider why do we need higher level of transparency in financial reporting when we're looking at our financial information. Okay, so I think in that, so if you look at the background of Corporation of Indian Railways, the size of Indian Railways, challenges being very similar to the private sector, then to see that there is sufficient evidence in the rest of the world where things have been done and have been successful. There is linkage to the growth of the economy as a result of accounting reforms. No direct correlation, but evidence of period in which that development has happened. Then you look at where we are today. And I think when you look at Indian Railways, we've crossed just the first red light. We've only crossed, we were single entry for a number of years. Significant period of time. Okay, take a pause on that and think, we've had a long number of years that we've been reporting our financials in single entry. We've now moved to somewhat hybrid, part cash, part accrual. That is still like an ember for us of saying, oh, look, we've still not come to a level which is benchmarkable with the rest of the world. Or, for that matter, will not give the necessary results. But in next 2 years, we have to be at that third pillar. We have to be full accrual basis of accounting. Okay? That again does not make it benchmarkable with what the rest of the world is doing. That is where IPSAS and the Indian set of standards, very few at this point, would have to be implemented. So I think that's the journey. Now, is that a 2-year journey or a more than 2 years journey? And if we do it in 2 years, is that going to give us the desired results? Is a bit of a question that we'll have to answer, find the right ways, the right resources. And the reason why I emphasized on the fact that we've had a very long journey in single entry is that imposes a significant challenge on resources. There's a huge learning curve. It's not that a core team can sit together and produce financial information that is ready to use for everyone. It then has to have people who would be preparing it regularly, users who will have to be educated of how do you read this financial information. So what is that? What are the key takeaways? And as I said, there are a couple of stakeholders which are missed. In my mind, there are regulators who would have, so governments first and foremost. The government will have to increase the sponsorship. You have that in railways. Railways has made a very clear, candid disclosure of saying we want to be ready 2018, 2019, by which we will have accrual-based accounting. But there are a lot of changes that are required to be made to ensure that is public information, which means that there is constitutional amendment that will be required to bring in some set of standards which become then mandatory for government agencies to follow or organizations like Indian Railways to follow, which in turn takes you to GASAB, the current standard setting bodies, which will have to again then go down that path of setting up a roadmap, not only setting up a roadmap, but then pretty much putting a full framework of accounting, which is required for companies like Indian Railways, corporations like Indian Railways, to come out and produce financial information which is giving you those benefits. And then as investors and lenders, I think I like what was said earlier by Varsha, but I think it's important that there is continuous education of the other lenders and the other investors who have interest in these businesses as to what is important when you read financial information of this size. Learning has to be in parallel. It cannot be, and same is true for the employees and suppliers. A significant effort around training, around education that will be required. So I think that's all that I have in terms of what would make this effort on accounting reforms contribute to sustainable growth. Very, very critical that there is a properly laid down roadmap by all of these stakeholders in terms of implementing successfully, starting with Indian Railways and then going to the other government agencies. Thank you very much.